We'll start with the second session. If you are not able to locate your seats, then please ask the staff around to help you. I'd just like to remind the deputations and individuals that we have this set of guidelines on security measures adopted in this complex, and if you don't have a copy, then you can also ask for one from the staff. And if you're here for the first time, expressing your views, please note that you will not be protected by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance, and your written submissions will also not be protected, as we have quite a large number of deputations, some 42, who will be speaking in the second session. So please be brief and concise in your speech, and 2.5 minutes, I'll cut you when your time is up. So the administration, well, I haven't turned to my right hand side, so are they coming in? So let's wait for a minute, because I've told them to be back by 11:08. So do we need to call for them? Well, please ask the Deputy Secretary as well as the Undersecretary to come back. All right. To save time, I'll defer to the first speaker. Yes, Motor Transport Workers General Union Public Light Bus Branch, Mr. Lam Hao Chun. Hello. Good morning, members and chairman. On behalf of the Public Light Bus Branch, my name is Lam Hao Chun. In fact, we have PLBs and GMBs, and just now, for all the remarks that I've heard, many of them were referring to GMBs, and they were asking for an increase in the number of seats. In fact, for PLBs, we have about 1,000 or so, and most staff do not favor that, because you can see that on Hong Kong Island, for PLBs, well, from Taiwan to Kennedy Town, how many PLBs are there? There are only 4 minibuses running the entire island, and even during peak hours, we only have 12. Why? That's because operating in Hong Kong Island, it's been extremely difficult to run PLB services, because it's been monopolized by railway, because it's too comprehensive. That's why PLBs do not have a room for survival on Hong Kong Island. We only have 4 minibuses running on the island. And during holidays, nobody is taking PLBs at all. And if you increase the number of seats, people are not taking PLBs because they don't want to wait for a long time for PLBs. So they don't want to wait. So they are not taking PLBs now. And if you increase the number of seats, what is going to happen? So for staff of PLBs, in fact, we don't want to see that happen. But then for GMBs, of course, as you can see, all the speakers were either owners, operators, and so on. And of course, well, they would all call for an increase in the number of seats. But then, as we have reflected that to our trade unions, given the current operating environment, their wages are not able to catch up with inflation. And GMBs, owners and operators have been complaining that they are not able to hire people, and therefore they don't have enough people to run the service. But then they should know themselves. They should know very well the operating costs, and that's why for GMBs they have difficulty hiring drivers. And if you look at the figures that they have submitted, all of the drivers are over 50. That's because they can't run the PLB service. That's why they have to go for GMBs. And you're talking about $410 or $420 for a day of work. All right, your time's up. Next, Hpand Limited, Mr. Y. Kem Choi. Yes, I'm the director of the Public Light Bus association. I've been in the trade for many years, and I have witnessed the legalization of PLB service. Well, in terms of seating, in terms of the carrying capacity, we are number 3, and it's a very popular mode of transport. And yet, we are subject to a lot of unreasonable restrictions. Social environment has been changing, and we have seen an increasing number of public housing estates, and yet most of the PLBs are not able to go into these estates, and we only have 16 seats, and we can only provide limited services, and that's why during the peak hours in the morning and evening, we are not able to provide sufficient feeder services to the riding community, and they can only wait at the stops, and with 16 seats on board, the revenue will not be able to sustain or to cope with the increasing prices, and insurance premium has been rising and so on. So drivers are facing very difficult operating environment. As minibuses are cheap mode of transport for the public, that's why I can say that with 16 seats on board, is not sustainable. Therefore, I hope that the administration should review the policy so that the number of seats can be increased to no less than 20. And if they are able to increase that, then it's like a double-decker bus. It's like a single-decker bus being replaced with double-decker buses, so the carrying capacity can go up, instead of increasing the number of buses by more than 1,000 or 2,000. And during peak hours, we'll be able to carry all the passengers, and even during non-peak hours, we will still be able to operate. So, Chairman, I hope that with changes in our economy, the current mode of operation is not sustainable. I hope that the seating capacity can go up in order to make it viable. I hope that the number of seats can be increased to 20, and PLBs and GMBs should be allowed to have more room to maneuver. We should be allowed to go into public housing estates to provide feeder services. Time's up. Next, Sai-Kung PLB Maxi Cab number 1 and 2 Company Limited, Mr. Fong Tak Keong. Thank you. I'm the person in charge of the Sai-Kung PLB Company Limited. In fact, well, initially the administration increased the number of seats to 16, but then with the commissioning of the rail service, the number of seats has also been increased. And I used to run the service from Sai-Kung to Choi Hong, and I've been in charge of this company, and when I check the records every day, I'm talking about some 18,000 passengers, and now I have some 20,000 passengers. So there are a few thousand more, and yet they have to line up in the morning, and very often there can be hundreds of people lining up for the service. And they are not able to get on board very quickly. And in the past, they used to stand for 10 minutes, and now it's 20 or even 30 minutes. All right, it's been so difficult for them to get on board a bus, and the roads have been so congested. And therefore, if we can increase the seating capacity, that would ease congestion, and I think that's better. So I hope that the administration can consider it. Next.
Next, the Cheung Kwan O Transport Concern Group, Mr. Lai. Thank you. Recently, the railway network has been rapidly expanding. Many of the new railway lines have been commissioned or under construction. For example, the Island South Line and the Kowloon Line. The government all along has adopted a policy which gives priority to the railways, emphasizing that the railway is the backbone of the transport system. For buses and PLBs, they only play a secondary role, and the PLBs actually only play a supplementary role. I think this positioning is wrong. We should actually review the role of the PLB vis-a-vis the entire public transport system. In other countries, minibuses do not operate like buses, but rather they serve areas which are not accessible to larger buses. In Hong Kong, we have many old districts, and it's not it's not possible for the large buses to go to those areas, and this is where the PLB has a role to play. We hope that the government will change its policy. And secondly, Many deputations have raised the issue that we should increase the number of seats on PLBs, and we are all in support of that. Over the years, many of the PLB operators are not being able to make a profit. Many of them are operating at a loss. There are also routes which are losing customers and have to be closed down. There are also some routes which have not been viable over a long period of time, and fares have to be increased. For example, the route connecting Hang Hao and Chang'an to Sai Kung, the fares have been increased every year, and the residents have been complaining to us about the gravity of this problem. So the government, I hope, will allow the number of seats in PLBs to be increased so that the revenues for the PLB operators could be improved. I hope the government can also change its policy and introduce barrier-free PLBs. Many of the physically handicapped told us that it's very hard for them to take the MTR trains, and it's also difficult for them to board the low platform buses, and it's even more difficult for them to board the PLB. So we hope the government will change its policy. Okay. Next, Mr. Sowai Sai Hong from the GMB Mexicab Operators General Association Limited. Thank you. Good morning, honorable members. Since 1969, October 1st, when PLB became legalized, the fleet of PLB stayed at 4,350. We only had 3 million odd people in Hong Kong at the time. But now the population gone up to 5 million in 1988. With the increase in population, the demand for public transport also increased. The government also agreed to increase the number of seats on PLBs from 14 to 16. Until 2015, our population is now increased up to 8 million. The PLB still has only 16 seats, and it's not enough to cater to the passenger demand during the peak hours, and the passengers do not have to wait for longer. Recently, we have a drastic increase in number of tourists, and that has added to the demand for public transport. Over the years, PLB operators have supported governments regarding the protection of the environment. When Euro 4 and Euro 5 were launched, the PLB operators started to use such buses. But these two models are not suitable for the local environment in Hong Kong because of the expensive maintenance cost. The necessary costs for the operators, including insurance premium, maintenance, and fuel, have gone up. Many of the operators are not able to make ends meet. Furthermore, there has been a chronic shortage of drivers, and as a result, we can only resolve all these problems if we increase the number of seats on the PLBs. Our government will approve the expansion of the seating capacity from 16 to 24 so that we can increase the carrying capacity, shorten the waiting time for passengers without adding to the traffic congestion on the roads. And the current models of PLB already have enough room for us to increase the seating capacity. Next, Mr. Wong Wing Kwong from the Hong Kong PLB Owner and Driver Association. Thank you. I represent the Hong Kong PLB Owner and Driver Association. Our association supports the proposal that we increase the seating capacity for PLBs. There is a serious shortage of PLB drivers. Nobody is driving the PLB buses. We hope that during the peak hours, when there are more passengers, the PLBs can carry more passengers and help generate more revenue so that we can attract more people to join our industry. Thank you. Next, Madam Wong Ching Chi. Good morning. I'm Wong Ching Chi from the New People Party. Under the current public transport policy, the PLB plays a supplementary role, providing feeder service in between railway stations and other public transport interchanges. With the rapid expansion of the railway networks and PLB's service has not been adjusted accordingly, we think that we should not belittle the role of the PLBs. The number of PLBs and the seating capacity has been subject to restrictions, and the overall carrying capacity of PLBs has not been increased over the last 3 decades. With the increase increase in population, the government must realize that PLBs thus is the essential form of transport. Many people in Hong Kong, for people living in Tai Hang, they live on the hill, and the other than taxis, the PLBs is the provide the necessary feeder service. The franchise buses are cutting the frequencies, and therefore the demand for PLB, the public transport has been increasing all the time. There is a shortage of PLB service in Tai Hang. Passengers have to wait for a very long time, and with the shortage of seats, it's difficult for them to board PLBs in between the bus termini. So if we could increase the number of seats, it can shorten the waiting time and also fill the gap regarding. So we think the government should allow the Euro model to increase the seats to 20 per bus. It can increase the profit, and and also there's an incentive for the operators to use the new Euro model PLB buses. And thirdly, increasing the number of seats on PLBs can enhance the efficiency of our roads, because while carrying more capacities, it will not add to the load on the public transport on the road system. So we therefore hope the government will increase the number of seats on PLBs as soon as possible and conduct a study into that possibility. We understand that the government will be under a lot of challenges, and as in the past, there might be a conflict among different stakeholders, and the plan may be delayed. The time is up. Next, Mr. Wulong Chun from the Raytop International Limited. Thank you. I've been operating a PLB for decades. We started out with 14 seaters, and now PLBs, the number of seats were increased in 60 subsequently, and the number of seats is still 16 now. And this is out of touch with reality. Passengers are finding it difficult to board the PLBs. The operators are operating under a lot of difficulties. We hope the government will be considerate of our hardship, as well as the inconvenience caused to the passengers. We hope that the seats could be increased to 20 or even 24 per bus. We hope the government will immediately or at least respond to our aspirations as soon as possible. Next, Mr. Kwok Wai, minibus driver. Thank you. I've been a minibus driver for many years. In the past, I was able to make a living to support the family, but now I can't do that anymore. I don't even get a stable income because fuel costs are increasing, but the government simply ignore the plight of the PLB drivers. We are not asking for too much. If you cannot increase the number of seats, please allow us to carry standing passengers. I mean, on buses, people are allowed to stand, but for PLBs, passengers cannot stand. So under the PLB, the MTR is operating everywhere. So how can we, do any business? We only can make some money during the peak hours. If we could increase the number of seats on the PLBs, at least we can survive. And that we don't have to increase the fares. It's not possible for us to compete with the MTRC. So please, lend a helping hand to these PLB drivers who can't make a living. There's no other option for us unless we want to become, security guards. I hope you understand. And secondly, I don't understand why the government is, giving so much resources on the franchise buses and the MTRC. But why not, spend some resources on PLB operators? We're not asking you to increase the number of seats by 4. If you allow us to entertain standing passengers, we would also accept that. If you think it's dangerous for us to carry standing passengers, it's even more dangerous for franchise buses. For when a bus turns, carrying standing passengers, you may not realize how dangerous that could be. Don't say that it's dangerous and then deprive us of the opportunity to make a reasonable business living. Thank you, Chairman. I hope the government will open up more of the restricted areas which PLBs are not allowed to enter. The PLB drivers, I mean, it's very difficult for them to make a living. Once they issue the fixed penalty ticket, they have to pay more than $400. Business is bad, and they are subject to all these restricted zones, and which have not been relaxed over the years. So I'd like the government, therefore, to actually open up the restricted zones so that they could be accessible to PLBs. Okay, have you finished? Next, Mr. Chow Yi-sung from the Hanwha PLB Bus Companies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Chow Yi-sung from the Hanwha PLB Association Limited. Many of our peers have indicated that PLB have been in business more than 40 years. There are 4,350 PLBs in Hong Kong. There has not been an increase in the number for many years. Subsequently, the government has positioned PLBs as a supplementary form of public transport. There are 3,000 odd PLBs. There are 1,300 PLBs operating in different parts of the territory. Why is it that nowadays the PLB operators are operating under such a lot of difficulties? That is because of the challenge by the MTRC, which have extended the network to new towns and public housing estates, so that the PLBs which provide the feeder service are under a lot of challenges. And other than that, there is also the problem of road congestion. And the TD is increasing the number of restricted zones as a result, making it even more difficult for the PLBs to operate. Some of the deputations have pointed out that the operators and the owners of PLBs have to take up, very expensive insurance policies. Furthermore, wages cannot catch up with the rate of inflation, so you don't have newcomers join new blood willing to work as drivers. Furthermore, with increase in the number of vehicles in Hong Kong, there is more congestion on the road. So these are the things which the TD must consider. If there's no new blood joining the minibus industry, then even if there are PLBs, there are no drivers to drive them. Many of the deputations have already indicated that we can resolve the problem by increasing the number of seats per PLB so that we can adjust the salaries for drivers, and more newcomers will be willing to join the ranks of PLB drivers. Next, Mr. Cheng Heng Long from the Luen Wo Hui Residential Association. Thank you. We would like to address the issue from the perspective of a member public. We hope the government can relax the sitting restrictions on PLBs. The number of seats were adjusted last time in 1988. Number was increased from 16 to 18. That was 27 years ago. Nowadays, our population has increased. People are now, the distribution of population has also changed. We hope the government will increase the number of seats to at least 20. Adding 4 seats per minibus can already increase the total carrying capacity for the entire fleet by 25%. It can also reduce or shorten the waiting time by the passengers, and that can help overall improve the overall traffic situation. Take Luen Wo Hui, for example. According to the government's policy at the moment, the residents really would like to take the MTR to go to the urban area, but we are a small community. We need to rely on the minibuses to provide a feeder service. During the peak hours, a short trip which normally takes 5 minutes, we have to wait for more than 10 minutes before we can board a PLB. There are sufficient number of PLB buses. However, the queues are still very long. At any time during the rush hour, you can have 100 people waiting for the PLBs. So if you increase the seating capacity, it can help shorten the waiting time and enhance efficiency. In the North District, and many people have already mentioned that many areas are rural areas which are not accessible to the franchise buses, and many people relied on the PLBs for the feeder service to take them to the MTR stations. Finally, I'd like to address the question of safety. The government always, some people already asked why the government doesn't allow standing passengers on PLBs. The PLB drivers now are not earning a lot, and according to my observation, many of the drivers are over the age of 60. We hope that we can increase their salaries so that we can reduce the danger posed to the passengers. Mr. Yu Chi Wing from the Estate Owners Committee of Laguna Verde. Thank you. I am Yu Chi Wing, Chairman of the Estate Owners Association of Laguna Verde, and we have the following 3 comments regarding PLBs. First of all, we demand that the seating capacity for PLB be increased from 16 to 20. By increasing the seat carrying capacity, we can enhance efficiency and generate more revenue. And increase the revenue for the operators by 25%. It can help offset the rising operating costs and relieve the pressure on the operators so they don't have to increase fares, and also reduce the burden on the passengers. It can also shorten the waiting time by passengers, making it easier for the operator to hire drivers. By increasing the number of seats, it can shorten the waiting time for passengers. It can also help the PLBs to pick up sufficient number of passengers at the beginning of the trip. As a result, it can also resolve the problem of people not able to board PLB buses halfway along the trip. Many of the residents living in Laguna Verde have complained that at any time for the passengers there who need to board the PLBs, they have to wait for a long time. Sometimes they have to wait for almost more than half an hour. Especially during peak hours at the Hongham MTR station, the waiting time is very long. Very often the PLBs are full and the passengers cannot board them, and therefore our State Owners Association demand that the PLB route number 26 should increase the frequency so that you can relieve the burden, the pressure on the Laguna Verde residents. And Laguna Verde, there is a serious shortage of public transport. We can only take Route 8P to go to Tsim Sha Tsui or the Hongham station by taking GMB number 26 for transit to take the railway system. Since the roads are very congested, the PLB cannot travel according to the original schedule. For people living in Laguna Verde, if they want to take public transport, they need to rely on the PLBs for feeder service, and it's very inconvenient. We therefore demand that the government should add a new PLB route connecting Laguna Verde with Mong Kok. Next, Mr. Law Kwong Keung, Sha Tin District Councillor. Thank you. I'm Sha Tin District Councillor. My name is Law Kwong Keung. I represent the New People Party. Nowadays, our public transport policy should change with the times. Our population policy and housing policy is changing all the time already. At the moment, all the housing estates, especially the larger ones, are located outside the urban areas.
And the government is trying to build very high-density residential developments, and this would have a big impact on the transport network. I agree that PLBs should be supplementary in nature, but the reality is that there is an imminent need for this mode of transport. A large amount of our population is away from the backbone of our transport network, whether it's MTR or Monshan Lane. and it's 2 kilometers or even further beyond the closest MTR station, and as such, the residents need to take minibuses to reach these transport hubs. Let's take Sha Tin as an example. For route number 808 to Ma Shan, from Kem Ying Yuen to Prince of Wales Hospital, as you know, most passengers on this route want to go to the Prince of Wales Hospital, but the problem is that Kem Ying estate is located on the hill, and a lot of time the passengers would find the stops full after the Ma Shan station, and it's very hard for them to get on at the 4th and 5th stops. And we propose sending in extra minibuses to the 2nd and 3rd stops, and it's impossible. It's because the minibuses are already full by the time they reach the 2nd or 3rd stop, so people at the 4th and 5th stops could never get on. And a lot of elderly people have arrived late, and as such, their appointments are pushed forward. Next, Mr. Chong Kam Leun from the Neo Democrats. Thank you, Chairman. I'm also a Sai Kung district councillor, and from my observations in the district, I saw that a lot of officers from the transport department have a preference for franchise buses, and they would only think about minibuses if they have no other solutions. Minibuses certainly have their role to play. Compared with railway and buses, they are much more flexible. However, during peak hours, a lot of passengers would find it hard to get on. Let's take one of the minibus routes in my district as an example. It's very popular among residents, and operators would send a lot of minibuses during peak hours. But since it takes time for the vehicles to return to the terminals, the waiting times are often 30 minutes or beyond. And this is a very common situation. And we have reflected this to the transport department, but oftentimes there's nothing they can do, because this happens all around the world. And I think the government should not miss this opportunity. They should allow the addition of seats on minibuses, and this would enhance the carrying capacity, and in turn the waiting times for passengers can be shortened. At the same time, the government should introduce barrier-free access, and this is complementary to the existing $2 concession scheme. For PWDs, they are finding it very difficult to get on minibuses, and this also goes hand in hand with bus regionalization. And a lot of residents said that they cannot get on minibuses, and as such, certain bus routes should be retained. So we should improve minibus service. Next, please.
District Councillor, please.
Chairman, members, as the District Councillor of Pok Fulam, we've surveyed our residents, and the opinion is clear. People want more seats on the minibus. And as this is the year 2015, I suggest that the negotiation between government and the operators is 2015. 20 seats and a minimum of 15 minutes frequency for every bus route. This will address the concerns that residents have that if you increase the seats on the bus, that you may drop frequency during the lower peak hours. This is a concern, and it needs to be addressed. And we think that minimum frequency should be one bus every 15 minutes for every not so popular route. And on that basis, 20 seats on every bus should be accepted. This also, as everybody has already noted, not only increases capacity, but it also allows for higher salaries for the drivers, and it will also 20 seats fit on the existing new buses, and it will therefore promote the operators of old minibuses to replace them and put up the new buses, so we have less air pollution. So I think 20 seats, 15 minutes. 2015 is the year 2015. If that's the agreement that can be struck between government and the operators, I think the Hong Kong community will be extremely happy. So I repeat, 2015. It's the year, nobody has to forget this. My final request to the many operators here, and this is for my residents, can you please put the bus number, the route number, next to the door, not only on the front, and on the back of the bus. Everywhere in Hong Kong we see people running to the front of the minibus to find out whether it's the minibus that they want. After so many years, please, bus operators, provide service to your customers and put the bus route numbers on the side and the back, not only on the front. It's very silly in Hong Kong how people have to run to the front of the bus just to find out whether it's the right one. Chairman, 2015, please. Thank you.
I see the bus operators nodding their head. 下一位。
請南區區議員張石容女士。
Ms. Cheng Sik-yong, Southern District Councillor. Thank you, Chairman. My name is Cheng Sik-yong, a Southern District Councillor. Over the years, I've served in Pt2, and there are more than 10 GMB routes, and I'm also a passenger myself. I take the minibus 3 or 4 times a day. But in recent years, we have received a lot of complaints from residents, and they felt that the number of seats was increased from 14 to 16 years ago, and now we should increase it further to 24 seats. Since we represent the residents, we are obliged to voice it out for them. For routes to Queen Mary Hospital, a lot of buses don't reach there, and we have multiple minibus routes that reach Queen Mary Hospital, and we can provide better convenience to patients. As district councillors representing district residents, and I hope the government can pay more visits to these districts. With the addition of seats, minibus operators can earn more, and they wouldn't have to raise fares every year. Whenever they come to us to file a fare application, we would always stand against it. With the additional seats and additional revenue, operators can hire more drivers, and they wouldn't have to raise the fares every year. And at the end of the day, the residents can benefit. Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Lee Shi Lin.
Bus frequency could be less than 15. 呢度溫現西抗。早晨，就想講咧，我點樣做到呢樣嘢咧？咁我係要求咧小巴係加到20座。
Good morning. I would like to request the additional seats to 20 seats for 34A. The government should also relax the height restriction and length restriction, and the cap on the number of seats should be cancelled, and low platform minibuses should also be introduced to bring convenience to people who want to go to hospitals. This way we can enhance the carrying capacity of minibuses, and the government should also negotiate with operators and that they should not raise fares once they can introduce extra seats, and I think this is reasonable. And as such, operators and minibus drivers as well as residents can all benefit. And Route 63 am from Wafu Estate to Queen Mary Hospital. Well, Wafu Estate is a midway stop, and the existing design of the minibuses are very inconvenient to wheelchair users and the elderly. And as such, they have to opt for diamond cabs or low-rise buses, and as such, they have to take bus number 4. Well, that's enough with the history, but let's not forget that there's a cap imposed in the 1970s on the number of minibuses in Hong Kong, and the cap is at 4,350. And there are also restrictions on minibus height and weight. And as such, minibuses cannot keep up with the demands from the public. And we cannot increase the number of minibuses. And right now, the population stands at more than 7.6 million. And we should enhance the carrying capacity of our minibus fleet. And we should deal with the outdated law, and the relevant regulations should be amended. And apart from the original 20-seaters, by lifting the requirements, we can also enhance the fleet size. Mr. Tam Wei-chiu from Motor Transport Workers General Union. Thank you, Chairman. I represent a non-franchise minibuses union, and today, under our union, we have different fleets. For non-franchise minibuses, the number of seats were increased from 45 to 56 and 61, and now we have 65 seats. So my question is, in the past 27 years, why couldn't we fight for more seats on 16-seater minibuses? Our population used to be 3 to 4 million, and now we are almost hitting 8 million. And with rapid population growth, the number of seats in minibuses should be increased as well. This is something we must consider. We cannot wait anymore. We should certainly change after 25 years. A lot of minibus drivers do not want to be drivers anymore because they cannot make much money by renting their minibuses out. Well, this is the reality. So today, a lot of minibuses are left vacant, and because they have no drivers, because no one wants to be drivers because they cannot make enough money. However, if we have extra seats, the carrying capacity can be increased, and the operating costs can be lowered. Under our union, we have another division for public light buses. I think we should increase the number of seats to for both types of vehicles to 24 seats. A lot of private light buses currently conduct school service, and but right now a lot of schools have a hard time securing such light buses. So I think in the gist we need 24 seaters. Mr. Lam Chen Yun, please. Good morning. The A03R license introduced by the government is really bothering a lot of people in the trade. For 16-seater school buses, a lot of operators have upgraded their fleet. The government's initiative is really messing up our plans. If we are having to upgrade our fleets constantly, I think it shows that the government's policy is inadequate. The government has always said that the railway is the backbone of our transport network. but we are already seeing problems after a few years. Does it mean the policy is not comprehensive or well thought enough? And with railway as the backbone, our buses and minibuses are only supplementary in nature, and they are gradually being phased out. And right now, railway development has almost reached saturation. I hope the government can think in a more long-term manner. You should commission consultancies to consult studies. I think the government should be more bold and think about the big picture in 10 years or 20 years to really prove that the government has a vision. And you shouldn't go back to your words all the time. We should have a long-term plan of 10 or 20 years. And by introducing gradual improvements, we can all benefit. Thank you. Next, Kwai Cheng District Councillor Mr. Andrew Wan. As some deputations already mentioned, a few years ago, a lot of minibuses, bus operators requested the addition of seats to 20. And the last time seats were added, it was 1988 already. The number increased from 14 to 18. Right now, at that time, we had about 5 million. Right now, we have more than 7 million. We can see the demand has increased drastically, but our carrying capacity for minibuses have not increased. I agree with the introduction of 20-seaters. As some deputations have said, it's very hard to hire drivers nowadays. And because of income or operational considerations, drivers, it's very hard to employ drivers. Sometimes they are underemployed. And one benefit for having extra seats is the lowering of operating costs, and it also benefits the entire traffic situation. It's a simple math scenario. By having more seats, traffic congestion can be eased. So for operators and drivers, this is something we should do, and it also benefits our environment. And I have something to say about the $2 concession scheme as well. After this scheme was introduced, we have seen a lot more elderly passengers, and the demand has increased. I don't know about the long-term impacts, but with the new demand, there's no reason to stand against the addition of seats to 20. Some people are worried about upgrading their fleets. Right now, a lot of 16-seater vehicles can hold 20 people. So the majority of the vehicles right now belong to this type. So I don't really see any reason against having 20-seaters, both in terms of traffic and environmental considerations. Your time's up. Next, please. Mr. Tang Ho Nam. Good morning, Chairman. I'm very concerned with the operation of green minibuses, and a lot of members of the trade would like to see the addition of seats to 20 or even 24 because it can ease waiting times for passengers. And I have something to say with green minibus service. I think the trade should introduce automatic transmission in minibuses. Most existing vehicles use manual transmission. And for drivers who work very long hours, they might encounter fatigue. So I hope the trade can introduce more automatic transmission minibuses, And second, I hope minibus operators can work with franchise bus operators to introduce octopus concessions.
Sorry.
For example, Shui Chuno will see a lot of public housing development, and a route 288 has been introduced to ply between Shui Chuno and Shatin. I hope that this route can work with New Territories GMB 28K 403 and 481A, so that there can be octopus interchange concessions, so that people will be able to ride on these GMBs at more concessionary fares to go between the area and Tai Po and the other areas. I hope that PLBs should introduce low platform buses. At present, well, within the franchise bus sector, there are many low platform buses and they can also carry wheelchairs, but then for PLBs, they haven't yet introduced such service. If they can carry passengers who are wheelchair bound, then there will be barrier-free access. So that's all I'd like to say. All right. Mr. Ronald Young, Hong Kong Association for Democracy and People's Livelihood. Yes, the ADPL stance is very clear. That is, as some speakers have said, we'd like to relax the seating capacity so that it can be increased from 16 to 24. As some from the sector have said, there are many points here. At present, the government's policy seems to be inclined towards the rail service, and that would affect the survival of many drivers and other modes of transport. That's why we hope that the seating capacity can be increased for GMBs and PLBs, because it's a vicious cycle. In the past year or so, according to the Bureau's submission to the panel, in the past, there were some 212 GMBs applying for a fare increase, and 98 got approval, and the increase was from 3.5 to 18.8%. So when there is a fare increase, whether it's the passenger or the district councillor representing the constituency, we would obviously say no to it. But then for PLB operators, they have no alternative but to increase fares in order to survive. And we can see that there are some routes, if they refuse to increase fares, then the operator would just cancel the service. So it's a lose-lose situation. Both the operator and the public are not able to get the much-needed service. As some speakers have said, in some districts, they do not just rely on the rail system, because there is no direct access to the housing estates or the court, and therefore they can only rely on public light buses service in order to provide the needed feeder service. That's why what we'd like to see is we should increase the seating capacity of minibuses. And secondly, there are only 4,350 minibuses, and if we want to increase the carrying capacity of a particular route, then out of the 4,000 plus minibuses, we can only redeploy the buses among different routes, so that would not help solve the problem. That's why if we are able to increase the number of seats, then that would immediately solve the problem of people having to wait for a long while and still cannot board the bus. And as has been said, the existing length is 7 meters, and the original design is for 20 seats, and they will have to demolish some seats before they can commission the bus. Yes, I'm a district councillor from the North District, and most of our areas are in the rural areas, and we have 17 villages, and it covers an extensive area, and there are some 5 GMB serving our district. And because of the small houses and also low density houses, so in terms of population growth in the rural areas, it has been very rapid, and there are many people living in our villages. That's why the demand for minibus service is very keen. And also for residents in the rural areas, they do not have any alternative mode of transport to go to the urban area, so they can only rely on GMBs. That's why the service of GMBs would be very important to those living in the rural areas, as the demand by villagers for GMB is very acute. Every day we are faced with the situation of having difficulty getting on a bus, and the queues are always long, and children are always late for schools, and people late for work. And there are only 16 seats on board of the minibus, and so even if just 2 more people want to get on board, they can't do it. So in terms of the number of seats, that should be increased by 4, so that there can be 20 seats, so that there can be 4 more passengers on board of each bus, and that would also help ease the congestion, and the waiting time can also be shortened, in particular during the peak hours. So I hope that the number of seats can be increased by 4, and I hope that that can be done as soon as possible. Thank you. Next, Labour Party, Mr. Alex Ha. Thank you, Chairman. The Labour Party supports the increase of number of seats to 24. We've been fighting for that for many years, and if we are able to increase the number of seats, that would help increase the carrying capacity of minibuses, and that would also help ease the pressure on fare increase. That's why we are in favor of increasing the number of seats, but then there are a number of concerns. We are concerned that with the increase in the number of seats, the license fee will be increased, and PLB drivers' income would be affected. So the administration must regulate that. And also for the number of stops, for example, the minibus stop beneath the Pt2 District Council is very narrow, and it's very difficult to maneuver. That's why we hope that the support facilities can be improved in order to tie in with this. And thirdly, some minibuses, well, during the first few stops, they have already picked up all the passengers, and as a result of that, no passengers can board the bus. For example, from Chenglong Tau to Chinwan, 96M, by the time they reach Long Choi, they would not be able to pick up any further passengers. So some minibuses during peak hours, for example, 96B, they should start from Long Choi, so that a few seats can be reserved for those boarding at later stops. Thank you. Next, the Hong Kong Society for Rehabilitation Center on Research and Advocacy, Mr. Anker Hong. Ms. Anker Hong. Chairman, members, and officials. All right, we were set up in 1995. We cater for the needs of the disabled and also the needy ones, as well as the elderly. And at this meeting, we would like to bring up the importance of barrier-free transport. In fact, with an aging population and also with an increase in population, we are also seeing a trend whereby people might get ill at a younger age. That's why many people are wheelchair-bound, and in fact, it's very easy to ride on a wheelchair. And if they have to go out, and if they are not able to do so, then they would be very depressed. And what's more important is that the demand is very acute, and rehab bus has yet to meet the demand. And therefore, if minibuses can be designed in such a way that they would also be able to serve these PWDs, because we are not just talking about those with special needs. In fact, every citizen in Hong Kong might also have this need eventually. And if you look at overseas government's policies, they would confirm the need for barrier-free transport. And therefore, in terms of the policies of the LWB and also the THB, they've emphasized this time and again in the past. And Hong Kong is also a signatory to the Human Rights Convention of the UN, and for PWDs, they also have the right to travel. And therefore, the administration must review the current policy with regard to minibuses. Is the dimension that they would not be able to accommodate PWDs? In fact, we have met with Mr. Yao and also the Bureau Director. In fact, for barrier-free taxis, we have already got it. But then, what about minibuses? Can you also consider introducing barrier-free minibuses? So we suggest that the administration should consider relaxing the dimension and also the weight requirement for minibuses, and we should introduce barrier-free minibuses and also PLBs, so that people going to the hospital and going out can also take minibuses. Thank you. Hong Kong Scheduled Licensee Association. Mr. Ma, thank you. For those of us running GMB services, well, in the light of the review, the THB has been concerned that with increased number of seats, will that have an impact on other modes of transport? Well, in fact, the authorities can be rest assured because it's like bus operators. If you change it from single-decker to double-decker buses, and if you change the size of bus, and for the 12-meter long bus, if you change it to 12.8 meters, in fact, that has no impact whatsoever on minibuses. Why? That's because, well, we are running our own services, and buses have their own roles, and taxis also have their own roles. Like taxis, well, when it changed from 5-seater to 4-seaters, in fact, minibuses have not benefited because we are actually catering for different passenger or clientele. Yes, even if there is competition, it's healthy. So passengers should have the choice. So the government can be rest assured in doing this. We also suggest that well, with the increase in the number of seats, well, we've been advocating for that for more than 10 years. So at this juncture, should the administration conduct pilot schemes for certain routes, for example, on Hong Kong Island, should you try that with parallel routes so that you can relax it to 20 seats or even 24 seats, so you can allow them to test run and see if that would benefit the passengers. In the new territories, you can also choose 1 or 2 routes to run it, instead of just engaging in empty talk, instead of telling us what we are going to do and whether there would be impact on other modes of transport. If you can test run it, then you'll be able to see it. What we are doing must be beneficial to the community. That's the most important thing. All right, minibuses would be running minibuses, and for other modes of transport, they each have their own role. I think the best thing is for us to do our job properly. That's why we should not do it across the board. For example, for minibuses, if they can have 16 seats or 20 seats, they can also have 24 seats. You can have different types and categories of minibuses. That's not a problem at all. The most important thing is that we should facilitate the public. We should not cause disturbance to the public. Thank you. Next, Fair Group, Mr. Quinton Cheng. Thank you. In terms of the design of minibuses, most of them are from Japan. But then if you look at the vehicle design, it's not suitable for them to become part of the urban transport network. And I can often see that when elderly try to board the bus, they will have to make a lot of effort before they can board it. And if minibuses are the mode for transport to hospitals. For example, the Eastern Hospital is served by 6 minibus routes, and you can see that when there is a follow-up consultation, the buses would be full. And then for the needy ones, they would find it very difficult to get on board. And also during daytime, usually that would be the time when the office workers would be working at the office, and therefore if they can provide some facilities at the community, and if you can provide feeder services, then those in need would be able to use the service more easily. And also, GMBs has been developed for more than 40 years, and even if you increase the frequency of scheduled buses, it's not going to help. You will still not be able to meet the demand. But then if you directly ask the operators to hand it back to the franchise buses, then you're actually punishing the operators that are providing a remarkable service. And on the other hand, if franchise bus operators are not providing good service, and if you ask the minibus operators to take over the service, that's also not reasonable. Well, the reason why we have minibuses, that's because in the 60s and 70s, with the rapid population growth, franchise bus services are not able to meet the demand. That's why the administration tried to introduce competition. That's why they introduced minibuses. But now the railway network has become mature, and for land transport, we don't just have 2 bus operators. And also for the minibus operations, they are very difficult, and it shows that minibus operation is not sustainable. That's why we believe that there is a need for us to review the situation, whether we need GMBs or minibuses, and also the role to be played by the franchise bus operators and also the minibus, so that the users will be able to decide which route they take so as to reduce the unnecessary resources. Only then will we be able to provide good transport services to the riding public. And finally, I'd like to express regret towards the administration, because in conducting this PTSS, it is still insisting on classifying the different modes of transport, and you're actually condoning to the monopoly by the large corporations. It's not going to help. Next, Hong Kong Public, the Smart Public Transport Group, Mr. Siu. Well, since the administration's cap on the number of minibuses at 4,350, there have been a lot of restrictions, and they can only regulate the service in a very indirect manner. And then for PLBs, we will set that aside for the time being. But then for GMBs, in terms of the regulation, it's been very lax, and as a result of that, in terms of resource deployment and also efficiency, they have been seriously affected. I think there are two problems here. First, for GMBs, after certain routes are cancelled, we can see that when arranging for replacement services, the administration has been adopting this band-aid approach so that there would not be any increase in terms of the overall resources deployment. For example, for 10A, 10M in Kowloon in 2013 July, because of the loss-making business, they have closed down the business and the routes have been cancelled. And the administration's immediate measure was that it would not be increasing resources for replacement services, and they try to increase new bus service 702, and as a result there would be more lost trips, and the service would not be up to standard. And for the other bus routes in the district, they've also been seriously affected. When franchise bus services want to change their routes, they will have to get approval. But then for GMBs, once they close down their business, the operator can decide what they'd like to do, and as a result, the franchise bus operators will have to make up for the shortfall. So does it mean that for bus operators, given the fact that their bus fleet is subject to a lot of regulation, they would also have to deploy services in order to deploy resources in order to make up for the shortfall in GMB services? And the administration has been condoning to the GMB operators, and they're using a lot of resources, and they're duplicating the routes of franchise buses. For example, on the Hong Kong Island, number 40, 52, and 44. All right, they are duplicating the routes, and in fact, the passenger load is very high, and that would be beyond the capacity of these GMB operators, and that would only add to congestion, in particular in the business district. For example, Repulse Bay and Stanley, there are many residents who are not happy with the excess supply of minibuses. But then in the other areas, there is a shortage of minibuses, and therefore I think the entire market will have to be considered in its totality, and the routes should also be opened up so that they can use larger buses. Next, Hong Kong Public Transport Concern Group, Mr. Titus Lam, concerning the government's GMB or the government's minibus policy, there are many problems. First of all, in terms of regulation, the Transport Department has not been doing its job, and as a result, there has been a lot of black box operations. For example, for GMB service, if you can take a look, you'd be able to tell the difference between GMB and franchise bus services. The administration has imposed the rules on GMBs, but then if there is any change in the bus routes, for example, cancellation or realignment and so on, that will have to they will have to consult the district council, and they can only implement it with the approval from the district council. But then for GMB, they don't have to consult the district council at all. So long as they can get the approval from the transport department, they'll be able to do it. So this is black box operation, and they have totally ignored the interests of the passengers, and they have not discharged the duty. So long as the transport department says yes, then they can just cancel the service. So what's the difference from PLB service? And also, the system is not transparent. Passengers have no idea as to what the situation is. For example, for GMB and PLBs, and they're sharing the quota of 4,350. In other words, if you run a new service, then you will have to redeploy the bus from another route. With more new towns and new housing estates, and also with a rising population, whether it's franchise bus services or GMB service or minibus services, the demand will increase. So if you want to run a new service, then you will have to redeploy the buses from another district. So would that be unfair to the residents there? What's more serious is that with the lack of transparency, members of the public have no idea as to where the minibuses have gone, whether they are serving the original district. For example, in 2011, they've cancelled GMB 10A and 10M, and after the cancellation, where have the buses gone? The administration has never made announcement about that, and somehow people found out that these Sham Shui Po minibuses have gone to Sai Kung. So for proper redeployment is okay. But then when Sham Shui Po minibus service is far from adequate, why has the administration not redeployed the buses from 10A and 10M to the original district so that where there is surplus, then you would allow the operator to redeploy the buses to other districts in accordance with their needs. So the Transport Department will have to review its minibus policy so that with the quota and also the regulation that would affect the service and people will suffer.
Right. Next, Mr. Lau Kee-fung. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent the Democratic Party. My name is Lam Kee-fung. I've come here today to reflect to members about the conditions in the North District. First of all, we had conducted a questionnaire earlier in the North District. Many of the residents in the area believe that there is a need to improve the service of the PLBs. Every morning at Lin Mo Hui, I think you understand that the PLB is a major form of transport taking people to the Fanling and Shengshui train station, but there are long queues every morning during the rush hours. The reason is that the PLB operators and the District Council have worked very hard to improve the frequency and so on. But the problem is that the question is that the problem cannot be improved. Lin Wo Hui is developing all the time, populations are increasing, and there is a shortage of franchise buses. So the queues and the waiting times are getting longer, and people are losing their patience. So at the District Council, we've been asking for asking for improvement, but that has never been forthcoming. We support the demand by the PLB operators that the number of seats be increased to 20. In the questionnaire survey, many residents told us that they would accept 22 to 22-seater PLBs. By increasing the number of seats, it can help shorten the waiting time. It can also help improve the service of the service standard of PLBs. The TD is concerned about two issues. First of all, whether the PLB operator drivers would lose the jobs. We do not believe that's the case because demand is increasing, ever increasing, and very often there's a shortage of drivers, even if there are buses available. So if that's the case, I think the demand is sufficient to ensure that the drivers will not lose their jobs. And secondly, you're worried that the entire improvement may hurt the interests of the franchise bus companies, but we don't agree. In the North District, you'll find that the PLB plays a very important role, and the role cannot be taken up by the franchise buses. There are many residents living in the rural areas and the Lin Wo Hui. I hope that there will be improvements. Next, Mr. Lo Sai-yan, North District Councillor. Thank you. I am Lo Sai-yan from the North District. I support the proposal that we increase the number of seats on PLB to 20. During the peak hours, there is a serious shortage of seats on PLBs. For the PLB running in Lin Wo Hui, for example, there are 3 GMP routes. There are more than 20 buses. During the peak hours, however, they're not able to meet the demand. And during the peak hours, passengers have to wait for more than 20 minutes before they can board a PLB. For those living in the rural areas, people complain that they cannot board these PLBs, along the route. And from the perspective of efficiency and environmental protection, increasing the number of seats per PLB has advantages. Like Mr. Lau said, I think both of us had been conducting question survey in Lin Wo Hui, and the public told us that increasing number of seats can help protect the environment. By increasing the number of seats on PLBs, it can help improve the operational efficiency of the PLBs. We've also heard that very often the buses cannot run because drivers are taking the leave. By increasing the number of seats, we can enhance the overall efficiency. However, even I myself, who supports the proposal to increase the number of seats, PLB operators in the government must do certain things. First of all, we shouldn't increase the number of seats while cutting the number of PLBs at the same time. We should not reduce the number of PLBs and drivers. We want to reduce the waiting time for passengers. Secondly, we believe that the PD should review the routes, the GMB routes. and restructure the routes. For routes with excess demand, we should expand the service. Take the Fending Square, for example, the demand has gone up, and the government should address that problem. By increasing the number of seats, the resources saved should be, put back into the same routes, or the resources could be used to hire, a station master and so on. Next, Mr. Cheng Chi Kit. Yes, my name is Cheng Chi Kit. I'm a registered social worker serving Chai Wan and Ngau Chi Wan. When I was young, I've been already riding on the buses operated by Mr. Ma, who's at my back. And I really would appreciate the contribution by PLBs. I have 3 suggestions. First of all, we should amend the legislation so that the operator can choose to operate 18, 20, or 22 seaters. The PLB, as a supplementary mode of public transport, already has its own specific role, and the different forms of public transport cannot, replace each other. When I have meeting with KMB, but sometimes, there is insufficient demand for a particular bus route, and the bus fares has to be increased. PLB service is a necessity, and people will not take the taxi simply because they have to wait, queue up for a long time. And taxi drivers don't want the customers taking short trips either. So after the concessionary fare for senior citizens and handicapped have been introduced by the PLB operators, the number of passengers has increased. So I think we should amend the law so that the operator can choose to operate 18, 20, 22 seaters. I don't want to see passengers who still have to continue to queue up for more than 20 minutes to wait for these PLB buses. Secondly, there should be low platform PLB buses, and we should have designated seats for those who are wheelchair bound. In some areas, the demand cannot justify a particular PLB route. Right now the PLBs are not barrier free, this is to the detriment of those who are wheelchair bound. Finally, I suggest that when adjusting PLB fares, you will maintain the same, habit of consulting with District Council. When the service is not satisfactory and the operator can still increase the fares, at least councillors can urge them to improve the service. So I hope the administration will consider all those 3 suggestions. Next, Mr. Chen Tik Yiu from the Public Transport Think Tank. Well, the Undersecretary told us that the government is constantly reviewing its own policy regarding PLBs. But whenever the government conducts such a review, it has never responded to the aspirations of the trade. Many of the deputations already told us about the difficult environment they are now operating. More than 10 years ago, they have already started to use 7-meter long PLBs. Now that we have 7-meter long meters, I have attempted to actually carry some passengers and a TV set on the PLBs. So honestly, for PLBs which cannot carry sufficient number of passengers, they will operate at a loss. For those who can, accommodate sufficient number of passengers, they still cannot make enough money, because since 1988, the number of seats have been fixed at 16. If the policy is not changed, it's difficult for the operators to operate the business. So I think that is a trend, and I think the government should review this policy as soon as possible so that the operators will not continue to incur losses. And secondly, I think the routes that you've designed are really problematic. For example, Route 88 from Kaiching Estate to Wong Tai Sin. The bus have to take many rounds, and they have to go to streets which are very congested, and the fare is only $3.60, and it takes an hour for the driver to complete the whole trip. When there are problems with the routes that you've designed, there are problems with your policy. And even for routes with long queues of passengers, the operators are still losing money. Other than the railway company, all other forms of public transport are designated to play a supplementary role and provide a feeder service. So I will not repeat what has already been said by the other deputations. I hope you will, subsidize the PLB operators so that they can introduce measures that will benefit the handicapped and the wheelchair bound. Thank you. Next, Mr. Leung Hong from the Hong Kong Kowloon and NT Public and Mexicab Bus Merchants United Association. Thank you. Today, I represent our own members to point out that we must change our transport policy. Very often, PLBs cannot go to certain areas for certain housing estates and restricted zones. We're not allowed to go there, and as a result, especially now that we have fewer and fewer drivers who are willing to join our ranks, we have many PLBs which are laying idle because of a shortage of drivers. When we lease out the PLB to the drivers, we can only lease them out for one shift per day. For an owner, if we lease out the PLB, we can only charge $600. If the government doesn't change its policy, then going forward, the whole industry will simply go into a decline. There are very few people we have no new blood joining our industry. Those of us who are operating PLBs are now getting old and gradually go into retirement. If the government doesn't change its transport policy, then for the PLB operators, especially the PLBs, will not be viable. The red PLB, there are 1,200 and 3,135 maxi cabs, GMBs. For the red PLBs, there are 1,200 at the moment. There are not enough drivers to drive them. Every day, the drivers are making very little money for the morning shift. Sometimes they even run into a loss. They're not making any money at all. So if the government doesn't change its transport policy, there's been complained that the passengers cannot board PLBs. That is nonsense. For the red PLBs, whenever there are passengers, they can take them. But you don't allow us to go to certain areas. How can we pick up the passengers? The government can go to the district and find out and see for yourself. Many of the PLBs are simply empty. The 16-seaters cannot fill up all the seats during the they can only have one full car during the peak hours, and then for the rest of the day they only carry a few passengers per trip. Your time is up. Especially, I'm sorry, your time is up. Mr. Leung, we've agreed that each deputation and individual can only speak for 2.5 minutes. So an insurance policy costs several tens of thousands of dollars. Mr. Leung, could someone please cut off Mr. Leung's microphone? Next, Mr. Ma'amok, representing the Brilliant Way Public Light Bus Scheduled Service. Chairman. What Mr. Leung said was about the red PLBs. What we were talking about refers to the GMBs. The red PLBs don't travel on a designated route, so we operate. Our modus of operation is different. Regarding the suggestion that we should increase the seating capacity, we feel really sad. When we put the demand to the government said they must first consult the franchise bus companies, and then next they need to consult the public. So today, I think it is most right. It is really right that we have the public hearing today, so that everybody can speak their mind. And for some of the housing estates, if the franchise buses cannot serve those areas, we are asked to serve those areas. But on the other hand, if the buses can go there, we will not be allowed to serve those areas. We are like illegitimate children, you know. Where for places which do not provide a viable business for the franchise companies, those areas are given to us to serve. So we are simply being bullied and discriminated against. So when we go to the transport department and when we take our grievances to them, they say you only focusing on your own profit. The district council will say they have to first of all bear the interest of the residents in mind. And we are asked to provide perfect service. If there are not enough seats, the passengers have to queue up for a long time, and the reporter to come, and they're saying that we're not providing good service. Next, Mr. Chairman Chen from the AMS Public Transport Holdings Limited. Thank you. From 9 a.m. this morning, more than 76 deputations and individuals have spoken. More than 75 of them are in support of increasing the seating capacity for PLBs. The crux of the problem is that both from the environmental perspective, from the perspective of the passengers, the drivers, and investors, this is not disputable. We don't have to waste time to ask what are the benefits of increasing the seating capacity. It's not a question of justification, but rather whether you have the will. That is, whether the government has the will to do this, and why do we need to do it. Today, the most important thing I'd like to say to the government is this. Why is it that all the PLB operators are demanding that they be allowed to increase the seating capacity, especially GMBs, which are now facing a structural problem? Where the problem cannot be rectified by, quick fixes. When you do a business, we're talking about revenue and expenditure. For PLB operators, our revenue depends on our ability to raise the fares or the restructuring of our routes. If we want to put up our fares, we will encounter opposition from district council. There have been a 10-year spell during which we could not increase our fares, while our costs are going up. For the GMBs, both the wages for drivers, maintenance, and insurance premium have gone up. What are the benefits of increasing the seating capacity? It can help reduce our unit cost. Overall speaking, and I think the TD would know, all the officers asked the operators to increase the frequency, but then for the operators, if we were to improve the frequency, we will incur additional costs. There will not be any additional costs if we could increase the number of seats. So all we need now is for the government to will to allow us to do this. We've had some suggestions that, I think the trade is willing to communicate with the government and the councillors so that we can come up with a good arrangement so that the trade, the government, and the public will benefit. Okay, all the deputations and individuals have spoken. And it's now time for members to ask questions. We have 6 members who would like to ask questions. Mr. Tan Ka Piu, Poon Siao Ping, Chen Kam Lam, Leung Kwok Hong. Anybody else would like to speak? If not, I'm going to draw a line here because we don't have enough time. So I declare that we extend our meeting by 15 minutes. Shall we say 4 minutes per member, starting with Mr. Tan Ka Piu? Thank you. Many deputations and individuals have come here to express their views, and we are really grateful to them, especially Mr. Ma, who has a lot of standing in the trade. He made several important points. He said that the franchise bus companies could change the number of seats and the bus models at any time they like. Mr. Ma said that the PLVs are like illegitimate children, and they're only allowed to serve those areas which the franchise bus companies are not interested in serving. I'd like to know whether or not this analogy is correct. That is, they're like illegitimate children.
And secondly, just like the previous hearing, I'd like to know what the trade thinks. Some district councillors feel this is a win-win situation for all. And I noticed that during 2011, when we raised this issue to minibus associations not to raise fares, and if we are able to introduce additional seats, can we promise to give rises to minibus drivers every year for the next 3 years? What do you think? Chairman, I'll briefly address Mr. Tang's question. And we have seen changes in our modes of public transport. And public minibuses are the best example. They were born out of market needs. They have important roles to play. In the past, before we had extensive railway network, it served to supplement bus service and reach places buses cannot go. And it also supplements railway service, and minibuses can also reach rural areas where there's no railway and bus service. And in the overall transport landscape, minibuses do have a role to play, and they are not easily replaceable. Because of the limited number of seats, minibuses do not have the same passenger capacity as railway and buses, so they have different roles to play. And with the changing market, there might be some ambiguity and overlaps, and they might not be able to fully satisfy the passengers' needs. And that's why we decided to conduct a roles and positioning review. Undersecretary, as you said, minibus operators face great challenges, and yet you are imposing a lot of restrictions of them. Is there anything you can do to help the green and red minibuses? Anything in response from the trade? Mr. Ma? If we can have additional seats, we can promise not to raise fares within 2 years. We are facing high inflation rates these 2 years, and it has created pressure in terms of maintenance and recruitment of manpower. The cost for parts from Japan has been increasing. I think the Undersecretary can pilot test routes in the new territories and increase the number of seats. Since I became a lawmaker in 2012, I asked for the 4th comprehensive transport study. And right now they are only conducting the public transport strategy study, which is better than nothing. And that's why we have this session today. The issue is complicated, and I'm sure the government has heard everyone's views. The mainstream opinion is very clear. So the government has to balance the interests of different stakeholders in the trade, and ample consultation should be conducted. The problem is the study takes 2 years. Is there anything you can do sooner? For example, relaxing or allowing minibus operators to operate in other areas like Lantau Island? Can you open up the existing restricted areas for minibuses? A lot of deputations mentioned the shortage of minibus drivers, and during non-peak hours, they don't have enough passengers. Is there anything you can do so that the trade can recruit more drivers? Are you going to insist on the 3-year restriction that minibus drivers must first hold a private vehicle license for 3 years? As I mentioned, a 3-year period and 1-year period make no noticeable difference. And can we make use of the supplementary labor scheme and allow foreign labor to be imported to Hong Kong? And these are easier things you can do in terms of policy. And for bus routes deployment, I have been involved in discussions with the Transport Department because of changing landscapes in residential developments. Can some routes be redeployed? But you said nothing can be done. I think you should listen more to the trade, because they are the ones who understand how routes should be deployed. You shouldn't say no all the time. Undersecretary, what do you think? Chairman, I agree with one point Mr. Yik said. We need some time before the roles and positioning review can be wrapped up. In the RPR, we would look at the number of seats in minibuses and the number of minibuses, etc. Other aspects can be discussed with the trade during this period. For instance, can some routes be redeployed? And can we do something about the drivers? The Transport Department has existing mechanisms in place for ongoing negotiations, and perhaps the Transport Department can give more. Thank you, Chairman. In the design of minibus routes, we have always listened to views from various districts. And we have always looked at introducing more GMB routes to replace PLB routes. So we'll certainly introduce new GMB routes in new areas. We will look at the characteristics of different districts, and we'll continue to consult the trade and the public. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you, Chairman. Once again, I'd like to thank the deputations here today. It seems that they generally support the addition of seats in minibuses. A deputation mentioned that when minibuses can hardly survive in Hong Kong, on Hong Kong Island, and they are opposed to the addition of seats. And my question is, how can we help red minibuses survive? Can we open up more restricted areas? And I hope the government can also provide us with more information on the number of minibus passengers in the last 3 years. Have you predicted the future trend? And a lot of operators cannot find drivers. Can you offer us any figures to help tackle the problem? So can the first deputation talk about his situation? My name is Lam Hao Shun. I represent a minibus association. We are talking about two main groups of stakeholders. One group represents green minibuses, one group represents the red minibuses. And for red minibuses, the big guys are AMS, and right now the license prices is about $5 million, and on Hong Kong Island, red minibuses can hardly survive. Only 4 routes can break even. We used to have almost 200 red minibuses, but now with the development of buses and railway, their business has taken a hit, and a lot of routes are losing money. They only have 1 or 2 passengers, and you know, the minibuses are either empty or all full, and because passengers don't want to wait for so long, so they wouldn't support the additional seats. Most you know, only the district councillors and the big bosses would support the additional seats. And right now, a lot of red minibuses have no business. They are losing money all the time. And the rents for red minibuses have gone down. In the past, the daily rents used to be over $1,000. Now it's only a couple of hundred, and the operators can hardly survive. And people are talking about introducing extra seats in green minibuses, and we are ignoring the plight of red minibuses. I think it's almost time. So perhaps the Undersecretary can address the question. In the past 3 years, the number of passengers in red minibuses remain at around 1.8 million. For the drivers, perhaps the Transport Department can give more. Please be concise. We have maintained communications with drivers. We have also done surveys. We have looked at the issue with the Labour Department and the trade, and they are actively recruiting part-time drivers. The situation or the shortage of drivers has not worsened in the last half a year, but of course they need more drivers still. So it's my turn. Just now a driver, Mr. Mew, I've been listening to you. You support the additional seats, and of course during peak hours your minibuses would be full, but for non-peak hours it wouldn't make much of a difference. If you are to have 20 seaters, how much more revenue can you gain every month? Well, can you give us an approximate figure so that we understand the situation? As a driver, if you don't give us extra seats, with the additional 4 seats, I don't have to pay $1 more. I don't have to pay anything extra, but at the same time, I can earn more. All right. We've been here for almost 4 hours. We have 2 sessions today. Most stakeholders support the additional seats in minibuses, while some do not find this a very good idea. This issue has been dragging on for so long, and I do think we have to move forward nonetheless. And our first challenge is to resolve concerns within the trade. How can we strike a balance? Undersecretary, I think we have no more time to waste. We have a lot of minibus passengers in many districts. We have some districts have bus service as well. I think this is high time for us to sit down and talk. The need is imminent. Some minibus operators in certain districts feel that our community is supportive of a greener transport scene, and we also have subsidies for pre-Euro minibus models, and the addition of extra seats can act as an incentive. And some deputations here today suggested low platform minibuses and spaces for storing wheelchairs at the back of the minibus. So these are all opportunities for us. This is a chance for us to introduce all these things. We can have spaces for wheelchairs, we can replace old vehicles, we can introduce extra seats, and we can have higher salaries for drivers and so on. And during the first session, some deputations are very positive. And if this is a one-stop solution to tackle all our problems, and is there anything the deputations have to say? Mr. Chen. The speaker is off the mic. Do we have this type of vehicle when we look at other countries? We are limited by a lot of height, width, and weight restrictions. So there isn't a lot of space to store wheelchairs. So you have to see technically, is it possible to have low platform minibuses? But green minibuses are possible, right? Next, Mr. Chen Kam Lam. Thank you, Chairman. The issue with minibuses is a very long-standing issue. Right now, we are only relying on a few regulations, but with population growth in rural areas, our transport policy fails to keep up. As a supplementary mode of transport, there's not much change for minibuses. So I think this is a good chance for us to review our policy. We have heard a lot of voices from the trade down the years to introduce extra seats. A lot of operators face great challenges, and they hope that the extra seats can ease some of their operational issues. So I hope the government can take their views on board without affecting the overall transport landscape. They can improve the welfare for minibus operators. But indeed, there isn't enough support for red minibuses. As Mr. Leung and other deputations have said, red minibuses face intense competition and challenges. So we should take note of that. In terms of minibus routes, is there anything we can do in terms of routes and lifting restricted areas? I agree with having regulations. Right now, we don't have enough control. But can we provide more policy incentives to convert red minibuses to green ones, so that minibus operators can better meet market needs? These are things we can do and should do. The government seems to be ignoring a lot of voices from the trade. So I hope through more dialogues we can improve the situation. We talked about increasing seats, and there are divided views on this. Some trade practitioners don't find it beneficial, but in my opinion, it also benefits drivers. If they have they can have 2 or 3 more passengers per trip, they would be able to earn more. There are different voices on this proposal. So I just want to know whether it's feasible to implement the additional seats by phases. For instance, we can implement it in green minibuses first before extending it to red minibuses. And at the beginning, we can have 20 seaters, and later on, if the situation permits, we can have 24 seaters. what does the trade think? You have 30 seconds left. Anyone wants to say anything? The government's existing practice is that they give priority to buses. So there isn't room for red minibuses to survive. And the market is dominated by buses, and the minibuses have no room to operate in. You should give some pressure to the government. Mr. Leung Kong, please.
Chairman, I don't know how many people will be voting for C.Y. Leung to become the chief executive. All right, I got this, which was given to me in 2012, and one is about transport item 18 in his manifesto, and it's about land planning and public transport enhancement. And he says that to coordinate railway, franchise buses, resident coach buses, and different modes of transport, so that he would also help the trade to resolve the problem of manpower shortage and also rising prices. So I don't know if you have voted for him. All right, I suppose Mr. Frankie Yik must have voted for him. Okay, so as Mr. Yik said in 2012, so after joining this council through the functional constituencies, he has repeatedly asked the administration to conduct a comprehensive review. And that's also in line with the policy manifesto of the Chief Executive C.Y. Leung. All right, he has listed this out in his manifesto. He said that he would coordinate railway and franchise bus and tram, as well as resident coach buses and then minibuses. So you rank number 5 on his list. So he'll coordinate everything. But then what is happening now? In particular, when it comes to increasing the seating capacity, the administration simply has no tenable stance. Okay, if it's public transport, so they are just asking for an increase of the number of seats by 4. So will they be able to take on board more passengers than a private car? All right, if you look at civil servants' private cars, most of the time they only have 1 or 2 people on board of the car, and you're taking up road space. So I think it's just a waste of time for us to discuss it, because it's always feasible to increase the number of seats, and there is no justifiable reason for the government not to do it. All right, the minibuses are asking that, all right, there will be an increase in cost if they increase the number of seats. All right, you can leave it to them so they can also decide if they want to increase the number of seats. That has nothing to do with safety whatsoever, right? So you have wasted a lot of money by organizing or by introducing some environmental or green devices, for example, Euro standards and so on. But then I think it would just benefit the larger corporations. All right, minibus operators have been asking for this for such a long time, and yet you still are reluctant to do it. Why are you not willing to do a comprehensive review? Because whenever there are public hearings like this, whoever doesn't have a justifiable cause would be criticized all round by all parties, because you have no statistics, you have no justifications, and you are not even able to come up with a tenable argument. So I think we should go after the one who should be held accountable, because there was no consultation whatsoever. So how can he coordinate this? All right, for the MTRCL. Okay, if you conduct consultation, you would not be asking the MTRCL to come and give us the reasons. So I think Mr. Frankie Yik, so you are not really doing your job, because he has already written that in his manifesto, and when you try to follow up on his manifesto, he just turns a deaf ear to what you ask for. All right, railway, bus, tram, and then coach, bus, and then minibus. So you rank number 5 only. Okay, we have extended the time by 5 minutes, and there is 5 more minutes to go. So, Mr. Yao, would you like to summarize what has been said so far? Chairman, first of all, I'd like to thank all the participants in the public hearing, and the trade has also given us a lot of views. And just now, from what I've heard, concerning the RPR of the sector, I think there are several points in particular concerning their role. Well, many speakers agree that minibuses would play a complementary or supplementary role to the main public transport role, to the main public modes, but then they would provide access to the less accessible areas. For example, GMB routes to the hospitals would be playing a very significant role. And in the remarks, many have talked about the possible increase in the number of seats, and more are inclined to increasing the number. And there are different proposals, for example, increasing that from 16 to 20, or some suggested 22 or even 24. And there was also one said that the cap should be lifted altogether, so that there would be no limit to the number of seats on board of the minibus. And I don't think I need to repeat the arguments for this. But then at the same time, there are also some opposition views, and some might not have been heard today, but then within the department, we have also heard those views. They come from the other public transport sectors. We have to be very careful in dealing with this. We are of the view that after listening to the views, it's very useful, because the number of seats and also the number of minibuses would affect other public transport operators, and that's why there are some suggestions saying that we will have to coordinate and communicate with other public transport sectors, and their needs might also have to be taken into account, so that overall speaking, we would not be affecting the overall picture before we take care of the needs of the minibus sector. And some said that we should also introduce barrier-free access and also low platform buses, and there should also be bells for disembarking and so on. And the device should also be easily recognizable, so that the number of routes should also be put at the back of the bus. And there are also more views suggesting that there is a shortage of labor, and there is also an aging problem for the drivers. We believe that we have an existing mechanism to deal with that. That's why there is no need for us to include that in the RPR study, and the Transport Department will be making use of the existing mechanism to talk to the trade on how many suggestions can be taken on board. And also on the low platform bus, according to the trade, some of the models might not be available in the market. So it's not just about whether the administration or the trade are willing to do it. We may have to approach the manufacturers to see if there are appropriate models for that to be done. But we understand that there are people who are concerned about the elderly and the PWDs, and voices have been heard about their needs. Concerning the opening up of the restricted zones and so on, well, there are established mechanisms to discuss this, but then it's not just about the minibuses. It would also affect other public transports and how they operate. That's why we need to discuss this in conjunction with other sectors, and there needs to be coordination. These are the views that we have heard today, and that would also facilitate our next stage of work. And at the TP meeting next Tuesday, we'll be discussing that further, so that that would facilitate our study on the RPR. Thank you. Thank you. 1 more minute to go. For those of you who have come to the meeting, well, for those from the sector who would like to see an increase in the seating capacity, I'd like to say that the Undersecretary has already brought up the reason why he has not proposed to increase the number of seats. That's because of other sectors' concerns. So can you go back and can you take the initiative to talk to the other sectors? For example, there might be routes that they do not want to run, but then you might think that you will be able to run them if you are allowed to increase the number of seats, and if you can talk to the other sectors on your own initiative, that might make things easier, and that would also be in line with the overall ecology of the sector. I think that's a positive approach, or else if the matter is to drag on, then we don't know how many more years we will have to wait. Okay, so it's 10 minutes past 10. I'll adjourn the meeting now. Thank you.